open government data is the talk of town, and various government agencies like NIC, and they are doing a lot of things in collecting and putting government data on one portal, and we have one portal of such like by NIC, datagov.in, and this special session by World Bank will touch upon this concept of open data, and here they are talking about open government data for smart governance. So very major things which we discussed throughout this India summit: engagement of citizen, where we talked about even M-governance, how to engage citizen, how to reach out to the person directly through a mobile, and also about e-governance. We talked about e-KYC, we talked about various initiatives by government to deliver the government services at the doorstep of person. And when we get to know this from World Bank's perspective about how to engage directly with the citizen and how to move towards a smarter government with this open government data in the era of big data technology, I think this session becomes very important and crucial. So if we have the guests from World Bank here present in the hall, so we'll start with it. 3 guests who will be joining us in this panel, and along with the World Bank, we'll have a representation from Planning Commission, Government of India. From so many decades, Planning Commission is utilizing open government data and as we all know, in planning various initiatives and various projects for government, for citizens in India. So representation of Planning Commission becomes very crucial for the discussion on this topic. So we have Oleg Petrov, Senior Program Officer, Transport and ICT from World Bank. We have Saki Kumagai, Social Development Specialist from World Bank. And we have Mr. B.N. Satpathy, Senior Advisor, Planning Commission, Government of India, with us for this session. I invite our guests on stage. Oleg Petrov, Senior Program Officer, Transport and ICT, World Bank. Oleg, with a round of applause, please. And we have with us Mr. B.N. Satpathy, Senior Advisor, Planning Commission, Government of India. So we would request you to join.
Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you were not participating in the yesterday's morning session when I presented on smart government and open data? Could you raise your hands who were not there? Okay, so there are a few people. Okay, I will try to avoid the repetition between the 2 presentations as much as possible. Okay, thank you very much to the organizers for the opportunity to share with you some of the best practices in using open government data to transform public services and improve social outcomes. I'm from the World Bank ICT practice, and I'm also in charge of the knowledge sharing initiatives of the World Bank in ICT for development space. And it's my pleasure to be here and share with you our experience. And also very honored to have on our panel a very senior representative of the Indian government, Mr. Satpathy from the Planning Commission, who will share a bit later on the Indian experience with open data. So the way we will structure this panel is that I will make the introductory presentation on open data concept and why we think it's so transformational. And then we will ask Mr. Satpathy to share on the Indian experience so far and what's next in open data in India, perhaps more on the supply side of open data from the government perspective. And then I will ask my colleague Saki Kumagai, who is a social development specialist at the World Bank, to focus on the demand side of open data from the citizen engagement perspective. So how can open data increase its engagement? What's the role of civil society in that? So we'll have three relatively short presentations, and then we'll hopefully interact with you and have some questions and comments from your side. So without further ado, let me just go straight to the slides. I think most of people think that open data is just a web-based information. And most people think we're already doing open data. But even in the World Bank, we've been doing open data for the last 4 years. But I would say 95% of my colleagues do not really understand what is open data. And that's the World Bank who is supposed to know these things, right? So I think we should not take it for granted that majority of people do not have a clear understanding. So I would like to again clarify that open data is data that's technically open, which means it's in the right editable electronic format or API. So it has to be in certain formats. So examples are TXT, HTML, XML, CSV, etc. So PDF, images is not open data. Okay, so I just want to clarify that. And it has to be legally open. So you cannot put restrictions on reuse of data, on commercial or other use of data. So it has to be properly licensed or otherwise allowed to be shared freely and distributed. And it is, in most cases, free. So if data is available on a chargeable basis, it's only for very modest cost of redistribution, but not to make any profit. And again, when we talk about open data, we're talking about public data. It's not private, it's not confidential, it's not sensitive data. It's public data, which according to the legislation on access to information is supposed to belong to the public anyway. So if it's supposed to be public, then why not make it open technically and legally? So it's just a low-hanging fruit. It's a relatively easy thing to do. When you talk about public data, it's all kinds of data. It's transport data, cultural data, scientific data, financial, statistical, weather, environmental, all kinds of economic data. So it's a very rich set of data sets. And also there's a lot of confusion between open data and open government. Some people equate that open government is about open data is about open government. These are actually related concepts. There's an overlap right in the middle, but it's not the same thing. There is a lot of open data which is not government. There's a lot of government data which is not open. Okay? And there's a lot of open government activity which has nothing to do with open data. So it's very important to understand the difference. And also, some people equating open data with big data. So there's also a lot of confusion. There's an overlap. Again, there's a substantial overlap. A lot of big data can be opened, but not all of it. In fact, majority of big data, is not open. Similarly, majority of open data is not open. It's not big. It's relatively small data sets. Would not fit the definition of big data. I would focus in this presentation on why open data on one specific aspect. In my view, the most exciting reason why governments should open data is not so much transparency and accountability, which for some of my colleagues in the civil society is probably the main thing. From where I sit, I think the most important catalyst and reason to open data is economic growth and innovation. It's what they call fuel. Open data is a fuel for innovation. And there's been a lot of studies which prove that open data can be a very powerful tool for economic growth and innovation. McKinsey study has been cited very frequently. A lot of people have questioned it, but still the numbers are very, very impressive, and they have a methodology to back it. They estimated 3 to 5 trillion annually in economic impact of open data in just 7 sectors. Similarly, in the European Union, the estimated benefits were up to 140 billion a year, which is about 1% of GDP. The Australian study of return on investment of open data found 500% ROI. Another study made by Deloitte and the European Union found that after data was opened, reuse increased between 10 times and 100 times more than charged for data. So there's a consistent evidence that opening data has a lot of economic impact. Just a few country examples. In US, after they opened the GPS data in '94 under President Clinton, today $122 billion of economic benefits are being generated in the US economy, and 5.8 million jobs in GPS-intensive industries directly related to this data. The UK National Mapping Agency supports over 100 billion pounds a year of GDP activity. Because US was a leader in opening weather data, now there are over 400 companies employing 4,000 people. In Europe, which lagged behind in open weather data, the numbers are in a fraction of that. In Denmark, after they opened the addressing data, they estimated the benefits of $21 million per year and 2,200% return on investment, according to the methodology. UK claims that after opening data on cardiac surgeons, 240 cardiac surgeon individual clinical outcomes were released, deaths were reduced by 1,000 per year. So you see how open data can save lives. And of course, in transport, open data has been most impressive. We have thousands of apps in New York, 68 in New York alone, thousands of apps across the United States, which are improving public transportation and saving time to people. UK has released a location of 300,000 bus stops, and because of the crowdsourcing through OpenStreetMap, 18,000 were corrected, which improved the quality of this data. And there are examples of companies which have used open data to create very successful business models. in UK, there's Spice Cavill. It's a procurement analytics firm which gets data from the government for free, analyzes it, and then sells it back in terms of value-added information services, and makes a lot of money on that, which is a good example of commercializing open data. Also in UK, by publishing prescriptions of medicines, this allowed to save £200 million a year because doctors there was a pressure for them to issue less branded drugs and more generic drugs. Also in UK, which is a leader in this space, that's why I'm giving you a lot of UK examples, because when they opened the data, they identified 20,000 pregnant men, which also helped to correct this information in the NHS. There are companies in every sector. In agriculture space, the Climate Corporation has evolved into a $1 billion company just in the last 4 or 5 years. And they are a very popular resource for farmers. They sell insurance products, they provide information portal, other information services. And as I said, they were bought for about $1 billion recently. And it's a great example of how private sector can commercialize government data, crop information, weather information, etc. In the energy sector in US, Opower is very successful in commercializing government and private source of data, producing very valuable analytics products to how to save energy, both producers and consumers. In health, it's just the beginning of this open data era. So iTriage is a very famous portal and mobile app which was recently purchased by Aetna. We don't know how much they sold it for, but it's a very powerful platform for sharing health information, which is based on government data to some extent. And we have, also in the US, there's this famous resource called greatschools.com, where parents can make smart choices where to send their kids. They analyze, thanks to this website and mobile app, you can choose the best school and find the right house or apartment to buy, thanks to ratings which great schools provide. For example, when I was purchasing an apartment a few years ago, for me it was very important to know whether the school is rated at 10 or 5 or 6. So this is a major factor for smart choices for buying real estate. Uganda is one of the countries in the developing world which has started to use open data. And actually this example is, shows that there is a very robust evidence of impact. Over the last 5-10 years, they analyzed the impact of opening government data in health area, and they identified 33% reduction in under 5 mortality after releasing this data. Just briefly about what World Bank is doing in the space. So not only we opened our own data about 4 or 5 years ago, which is now available in multiple languages on our website, mobile apps, so you can get any kind of information, statistical, financial, procurement information. But increasingly we're starting to collaborate with governments to help them make the most of their data for economic, social development. So we have a team which is working in about 30 countries on this agenda, and we work on different aspects of the what we call innovation ecosystem around open data. And so open data is not a technology project. If you can see this ecosystem, it has multiple dimensions. There's a leadership factor, so you need to have strong political leadership for it to work. There's a policy and legal framework. Without that, open data will not be really effective. You need to have an institutional setup. You have a focal, agency. You need to have representatives in each agency, ministry, data officers, etc. You need to have focus on developing, catalyzing applications and co-creation of services. There's a lot of capacity building and training which needs to be done. Citizen engagement, the demand side, extremely important. You need to have financing available to catalyze the ecosystem and finance the opening of data, digitizing data, and etc., and creating of mobilizing the developers. You need to have technology infrastructure, take care of cloud computing, hosting platforms, and cybersecurity, privacy, etc. So we have a range of activities to support client governments. So we collaborate on open data assessments with different governments, both national and subnational, which helps produce action plans in a particular sector or particular country or focus area. We help launch and implement and finance open data initiatives. So if you're interested to initiate open data program, we can support that. We also work on the supply side of open data, helping improve the quality of data, digitizing data and publishing in compliance with standards. As well as the demand side, Saki will talk a bit more about citizen engagement activities. We're doing a number of tech camps, hackathons, apps competitions, data journalism, boot camps, etc. Helping on legal issues, doing analytical work, case studies on different countries and other places, and building partnerships globally on open data. And you can be also part of these partnerships. We work, as I said, 30 countries. Started working in India about 8 months ago, so we can share a bit more about this during questions. Working both at the central government level, and it's a party is actually our partner. We're discussing some collaboration activities with the central government, as well as with the DIT, the Department of Information Technology. And we're also working at state level. We collaborated with the governments of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana on opening open data innovations in the rural space. We have developed this toolkit on open government data, which is available in open source to everyone to use. You can download lots of case studies, lots of reference materials, various tools, including what we call the Open Data Readiness Assessment and Action Planning Tool, ODRA. So that is our flagship tool, which allows us to quickly develop an action plan and to help a partner government organization to launch an open data initiative or to take it to the next level. So it provides this comprehensive analysis of gap analysis of benefits, opportunities along the 8 parameters of open data ecosystem. As I mentioned those 8 pillars earlier, so we look at the level of readiness, from red to green, where are the gaps? And as I said, work with a number of countries. I'll just highlight a couple. Moldova was one of the first countries to launch open data in Europe and Central Asia about 4 years ago under World Bank Finance Project. They initiated the open data program. Today they have about 800 data sets, a lot of apps, a lot of examples of effective use of government data, which was very much integral part of the Smart Government Project, e-government project, which World Bank Finance. We also worked in Russia in the state level, Ulyanovsk Oblast. Actually, that was a place where the open data methodology, assessment methodology was developed. That's, we piloted this ODRA, Open Data Readiness Assessment tool in Ulyanovsk. And more recently in India, we had the collaboration with the state governments in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, where a workshop in September and a team of experts did a quick readiness assessment for the rural open data solutions. And as I said, we do analytical work. We'll be very keen to collaborate in India, producing a case study of open data at the central government or at the subnational level. And the Global Partnership for Open Data, which World Bank is financing, is available to all of you to provide training, to raise awareness, help on data portals, help on broader open data initiatives. So we mobilize a number of leading organizations like Open Data Institute, Open Knowledge Foundation, and many others which are available to help any client governments. Thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Satpathy and ask to make a presentation on India open data experience.
Special session today. I was wondering why it was called special session. And there are 2 reasons, could be 2 reasons. One is no one is interested in this data. Second is Planning Commission is a part of this. So maybe one of these 2 is important. But I will start my presentation with 3 things. One, I'll start with certain stories. Then I'll go to the global agenda, and then I'll come to the Indian perspective. In the year 2006, the e-governance was approved as a scheme by Government of India. I had just joined the Department of Information Technology. Simultaneously, in the Department of Personnel, another movement was on, that was the Right to Information Act. That was also enacted, and every citizen had a right to information from the government on whatever aspects he or she wants to have. The 2 simultaneous things were happening in India in the year 2005-06, the Right to Information Act and the e-governance. The objective of e-governance was to deliver government service, public services at an affordable cost at wherever he is or she wants. The Right to Information Act was whenever a citizen wants, he will seek the information, and that information is mandatory to be given. That was the year 2006. Today we had so many sessions on m-governance, on e-governance, and so many technology sessions. So Planning Commission was involved in both these exercises on the Right to Information Act and the e-governance. Now, e-governance today is a major program. It has now become Digital India program. What about the Right to Information Act? That continues. That's legally enforceable. In the year 2012 and 13, the open data as a policy came into being. And the basic objective of that was to make every activity which is connected with the government, where government expenditure is involved, put that on the portal, on the website of every department, so that the Right to Information Act becomes irrelevant. Everything is transparent, so that all activities of the government, wherever the government is involved, put that on in the data on the website of every department, so that there is no need for any citizen to go to RTI and seek information. That was the third thing that happened. All these were basically reforms in governance. A Right to Information Act, that was to enforce accountability of the government. The e-governance was to increase the efficiency of the government. And the third one was to increase the trust in the government. So all these three were a part of the governance, reforms in governance. Now what's the global scenario? Globally today, if you ask any country, there are 5 major issues. First issue is climate change. The disasters that are happening, the infrequent weather storms that are happening. Second is energy security. Third is food security. Fourth is good governance, global governance. And the fifth is, as he is saying, big data and open data. Now, this is where we stand globally. This is how we traveled to the open data policy of the Government of India, which was enacted as a policy. Now, please remember, this open data of government data is not data per se. This was basic objective of this is any data which is produced by the government through public expenditure is to be put in electronic format and which can be editable. Now this is the key of the whole thing. On 17 March 2012 this was formulated. And this was the objective of this. You can see that this is basically technology enabled information rendering to the government. Again, this was basic objective. Again, is to, if you have everything transparent, every activity is given on the portal of the government, then there is no need for anybody to go to RTI. So there will be no necessity for a grievance to come up. Now, the scope is this. All shareable, non-sensitive data, there are many defense data, other thing data are not to be put on this sheet, either in a digital or in a form which can be used by the public. All ministries of Government of India are participating in this, all ministries. Now, who are the key stakeholders in the whole process? Now today, what is the implementation? I have given the data for June. I'll tell you why I have come to June and not beyond June. The basic objective of this, from 2012 to 2014, the 2 years, we have achieved, you can see, only a data sets of 7,764. Is this the size of the data the government is producing? No, not at all. There is a huge data set available. So this basically shows that the departments are either not willing or not able to generate that kind of interest in producing the data on the electronic format, in the format that is prescribed by the Department of Science and Technology. So here is the major problem in supply of data. Anything that talks about data, oh, what the hell is he talking about? I have produced so much of data. It is available in the files, so you can ask for that file and I'll give you. So if the RTI comes in, then he has to produce the data but if it is to be on the electronic format, then he has to take the trouble. So the basic objective of this was to break that mental barrier, that whatever you are doing, produce simultaneously, instantaneously on the website. This is the objective major, and this again continues to be a major problem. Now if you look at these features of the portal that you can see, I'll not go into these details, you are all aware of this, you must have browsed this data and all that. But data management is very important, and data controllers are very important. Every department of Government of India has a data controller who is an employee of National Informatics Center. He produces the data in electronic format. Sorry. But he doesn't own the data. The data is owned by the department's particular division. When he produces the data, then he is responsible for the data he has produced. Now these are some of the examples of the data which are given in the portal. Daily market prices of commodities, import-export data of India. Then you have the total number of catalogs which are available right now. Then these are the total data sets of the Planning Commission which I wanted to show, which is again a multi-sectoral data. You can see the most important and most sought after data is environmental data. And this is the data set popularity also. You can see that this again the environment is very important here. Now, the issue is, can 7,000, now it is 10,000 data sets today if you can see that. Issue is, if you look at the data sets produced by each department, it's huge data sets. And the basic objective is put it on one portal so that nobody goes to other means of securing that data. This itself has immense business opportunities for the private sector if they have this kind of data which is produced for government expenditure. But somehow a supply lag is there. There is a certain redundancy in the system which is not being encountered at the time of producing this data. Now I'm saying this as an impediment to the whole policy of the data. So in order to make this data set much more popular, we need to do much more things. Now everybody looks at data as a statistics. It is not statistics alone. That is the emphasis that we are trying to give in Planning Commission. That this is not merely a property of Planning Commission or of any other department. This is the government taxpayers' money on which you have spent the money. And the objective of this data is not just merely to put it on the portal and forget about it, but to look at how have the government fared over the period of time in this. Now look at one simple example. Everybody today would like to know how his mobile bill has changed over a period of time. Everybody would like to know how much electricity bill he has been paying the last 10 years. Everyone would like to know. So this kind of data should be made available to him or her at his doorstep. Now this is possible, but this kind of data requires a lot of efforts. So the policy has just started yielding results, but we have a long way to go. To produce big data is a very big challenge for us from the government. Now, what is the success story then? The success story is it has really fostered certain innovations that created many opportunities for the business. All sectors of the economy have created data sets in this, and it's all on a common platform. But then we have a long way to go in this. This is just, I will say, a fraction of what data that we have, a fraction of the objective that we have, that is, this data can be used to make your government accountable. This data is there to make the system transparent, and this data is there to generate. So what are the steps that we are taking to make it much more robust, much more important for a citizen to look at it? Now the steps that we have recently taken are the following. One, we have along with the World Bank, we have generated a project where a study will be conducted on a particular sectors to see to what extent the data which are available, which are sought by the private sector, by the industry, by the academia, are available or not available. If they are not available, are they available in the system and they can be put on the work. So this is one, to look at the gaps. The second one is, that is the most critical part, is to use this data for planning. Planning, whether it's the government planning or the strategy planning for the private sector, these are two things that we are trying to see. This study which we are trying to do is, how does an investor plan for a particular district where he or she is to put up a plant, and what are the requirements that he has? Are they available on this portal or they are not available? This is the second thing we're doing, that whether this data policy will generate that kind of information which is required by an investor to do his or her business. And the third one is this data made RTI applications less in number? Since the year 2012 and prior to 2012, the RTI applications, in post-2012 RTI applications, have they dwindled, have they been less? Because of this policy, and so that every data is now available. Surprisingly, paradoxically, these reforms in governance which happened, the government became a victim of the whole process of governance. So much of RTI, so much of data, so much of information is available. The citizen found, well, the government is not doing the job that it's supposed to do. And then it became a victim of that. So, all said and done, this policy is a very important policy, because of the democratic government. The most important thing for a citizen to evaluate his government is to have the information on his or her portal, whether the government has delivered whatever it has promised at the time of the election. So this is supposed to render that service, and that's where, from e-governance to e-platform to e-data, what we are trying to see is, that's where we have the link. When you, from the e-governance, the government is providing the services. This is another service to see that the services that are provided and the government is accountable for that. With this, I think we will be able to go forward, and I'm sure the World Bank, India is a leading country as far as open data is concerned. Very few countries have this kind of policy or program. And World Bank is one of them. In fact, in one of the meetings in February in Dublin, the IMF, in fact, was wondering how could the government of India do the open data when we have not succeeded to have the open data in our own system. So they were also wondering. Yes, World Bank is there, UK is there, some other countries, but India is now a leading country in the developing world. We have miles to go, but I'm sure we will certainly be able to produce the results that we have targeted for. Thank you so much.
Let me now ask my colleague.
Thank you, Oleg. So that's for Oleg, and presenter from Planning Commission kindly presented about being open. But I would like to focus on being open for what? Being open for whom? So it's going to be a very short presentation, but I'll focus on those two areas. So open data and citizen engagement. Before getting into the what kind of citizen engagement we're talking about around the open data, I would like to briefly go into what is citizen engagement. So broadly, when I or we at the World Bank, we talk about citizen engagement, it's about the closing the feedback loop between the governmental service providers and citizens and service users. On this presentation, I have a diagram. It might be a bit harder to see, but on your left side, so on the top side, there's government, and at the bottom side, there are citizens or service users. And then the first arrow goes from the government to citizens, sharing information and sharing data. And then citizens to provide feedback to the government, and it can be solicited feedback or continuous feedback, meaning, say, surveys, how customers or citizens are satisfied with the services being provided. Those are solicited feedback. It happens time to time. Census is one of the things. It's data collection method. It's not really about the satisfaction, but in terms of data collection, that's one of the examples. Or customer service. Private sector do have great examples of customer services, or it's essentially grievance redress mechanisms. Those are continuous feedback. As issues or feedback comes up, citizens or service users provide feedback continuously. And the last part of the citizen engagement, and it's the critical part, is that the taking action and communicating the service users or citizens what the government or service providers are deciding to do with the feedback they've collected. So what kind of citizen engagement could happen around open data? One is government or service providers interacting with the citizens. When I talk about citizens, by the way, it's broadly about civil society organizations, individual citizens, academia, think tanks, journalists, private sector, and so forth, coming down to the really individuals, no? We individuals have multiple faces, I suppose, to say that even the government person at the end of the day is a citizen who uses government services. Private sector person also is a citizen. So broadly, citizens are defined in this context. And so first category of the citizen engagement around data is to interact with citizens on what kind of data should be prioritized and released for the public good. So it's the releasing part, being transparent part, what kind of things should be expected and so forth. The latter type of citizen engagement around open data is to use data. So there are two types. And thus far in the presentations, being open is discussed, but being open is the first step of the long journey to use the data for benefit from the data or being opened. And not everything has to be done by the government. It's rather about the constructive engagement between the government or service providers who are opening up the data with citizens to find or identify challenge areas and then deliver solutions. So I talked about two types of engagement around open data. So I'd like to go through what kind of citizen engagement can take place in those two types of citizen engagement. First, around being open. So what kind of citizen engagement can take place around being open? So first is deciding open data for what? Data is valuable when it's used and reused. So understanding what type of data demands are out there is very important. So this is the matching of what kind of data are available from the supply side and what kind of data is being demanded from the citizen side. Second type of citizen engagement is improving data quality. There can be a constructive relationship between government and citizens or civil society to establish a relationship to improve data quality and verify if the data being provided is right. It doesn't have to be criticism, no? It can be just constructive relationship to improve the data. Third category is around the policies and action plans or strategies on open data. There again can be constructive conversation of between government and citizens to generate open data policies, action plans, and strategies that make sense to both parties. That way there can be more effective matching of supply of data and demand for data being opened. And here I put the example of Open Government Partnership as an example. They do have a tripartite relationship where civil society organizations could voice their demand and opinions about action plans and the way forward. Around the second type of open data area where citizens can engage is to use the data. So from the government perspective, open data can be more effective platform to share information with citizens. Through open data, there can be more analysis done on data. So with this information, governmental service providers could partner with the civil society intermediaries to analyze data and better communicate what are the challenging areas, what are the things that the government is doing well, or service providers are doing well, or maybe not. But there can be more targeted information sharing being done. And around those targeted information sharing, service providers and government can ask more targeted feedback from the citizens. And having those feedback channel, citizens can become the part of co-generating solutions. Third area is developing new applications and economy. Oleg talked about this quite a bit. So first area can be improving service delivery. It can be around the electricity, water and sanitation, health, education, transport. There are so many sectors that can be improved through open data, and then having citizen inputs around these areas. And then also, open data and newly developed applications could accelerate growth and shared prosperity. For instance, we were in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh in September. It was to develop an open data-enabled solutions to increase rural prosperity, shared prosperity. So there are opportunities to, one, increase the prosperity or income generation and be inclusive about it. Third category is overall to enhance good governance. For instance, I'm not really a data person. I hated math as a student. Data actually puts me into sleep. But when something like budget data, which can be extremely boring, put into the understandable format, it can actually be interesting and you can understand it. And from the government side, it will be more effective information sharing about how they are spending their budget, which they collected from taxpayers, which is citizens. I would like to briefly talk about the Indian experience. There are a lot of emerging examples coming out from India. We found in September, when we were looking around what kind of solutions are being developed in India, we found a lot of solutions, open data-enabled solutions in agricultural area. These are some of the examples. But on this presentation, I would like to highlight two international examples. One is coming from the World Bank supported project, and another one is coming from the private sector. First, I would like to focus on the World Bank supported project in Dominican Republic. It's actually around the electricity sector. This is the picture of their online platform that they have, and it's called Voz Electrica. It's basically an open 311 platform that they have. So basically, they developed the platform based on available data. They use multiple data sources to develop this platform, and on top of that, they are collecting customer feedback on electricity delivery. So if I were in Dominican Republic and not getting the electricity during the time that I'm supposed to getting, I can call or use the social media to report, I'm not getting electricity, what's going on? And service provider or government can act upon it. Many cities and municipalities in the UK and the US have similar systems, not only for electricity sector, but overall service provision of the government. And we also see a lot of similar platforms being built for transportation projects in Latin America. And I would like to focus on another example from the private sector. Here, I would like to introduce Yelp. It's a web application and also a mobile application. It's available in cities in the US, Canada, and some European cities. It basically provides service information of restaurants, shopping centers, or any types of shop, car repair, home services, health and medical services, and etc. Its opening hours to location and so forth. And it also allows customers to provide feedback. So you can, this is the page on hospitals around Washington, D.C. areas. So first one, you can see the name of it, photo of it, and then how customers are rating them. And actually, it's rather hard to see, but the third one is actually a very famous hospital. And surprisingly, they are rated for 3 stars. I was very surprised about it, as they were very famous. So they developed this application or platform based on several data sets. And on top of that, they are allowing service users to comment on their experiences getting services. So from the customer service point, you can pick and choose where to go to receive, say, medical services. But with this type of applications, there are several questions that remain with the government citizen engagement. Would this type of model be applicable to public sector, where competitions are not existing? Maybe it's applicable to some sectors like education and health, and we see some of the examples already, but questions remain. And this is very high-end solution. How can such service be useful in development context? Since we are coming from the World Bank, this always is a challenging question to ask. And that will be the end of my presentation. And I would like to have your feedback if possible, and feel free to contact me at my email. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I open it for discussion, let me ask to your states or your organizations, do you feel like it's time for launching open data initiative?
Satpati, 2 very small questions. In the national data sharing policy, what is the legal protection in case some erroneous data goes inside? In case the data is erroneous or faulty, what is the legal protection to the supplier of the data? Yeah. Unintended.
The policy says that the data supplier is to be made entirely responsible for the data. So in case there is some distortion in the data, which is not correctly, he or she the message goes to him to make a correction in the data if it is not intentional. And by and large, in the government departments, where the data controller ensures that the data which is put on this portal is correct.
You know, that is the reason why many of the departments are not coming forth. Because in Maharashtra also, we have a state data bank policy now. And government of Maharashtra issued an order saying that any data to be put up for any policy decision, discussion, meetings, reviews, has to be taken from the SDB only, State Data Bank, which has become effective from 1st of August 2014. But I find that departments are not very forthcoming in giving the data. They want to retain the data with them as if they are the masters of the data. And this is one of the reasons.
Yes, you're right, you're right.
This is one of the reasons. Second, very small questions. How many states have participated in this?
As far as the policy is concerned, 4 states. 4.
I see. And in case Maharashtra has to participate, then what
Yes,
am I?
they're always welcome.
What are we supposed to do?
They only have to write to the Department of IT that they want to participate.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just comment on the participation. I think there's There are two ways to participate in open data. One is you launch your open data initiative, and many states have done it, independent on their own in various countries. The other is there's a central open data portal in India, which you can upload the data on the central portal without waiting for your own portal to be created, right? And I think that's a number which you use, is how many states upload the data on the national portal, right? The question, how many states are uploading their data on the national portal? I think it was 7 in your presentation. There are 7 states.
Yeah, now I think it is 12,000 today. 12,000 data sets. And all the departments are participating.
Right.
All. But this volume of the data varies from department to department. But as is rightly said, there is an inertia in the system to put the data on the electronic format, in the desired format. That is simply because it is considered data means statistics. Nobody is interested in statistics. So that's the major lacuna in the whole thing. But maybe this is only 2 years, so in course of time this will happen. The other part is the data which is available on the portal has to be used also. It's just not supplying for the sake of supply. So we are now using a tool to see how much of the data is being used by the private sector, by the household sector, and by the government itself. This is another innovation which we are doing now.
Very good. Please, more comments?
Yeah, I have two questions over there. As a private application service provider, how do I know that this specific data set is an open data, and how I am being protected from the legal obligations on that if somebody sues me? Second part, as a citizen, where do government draws the line between the privacy of an individual's data and the public data? Because at some point in time, from the public expenditure itself, an individual's data is also being collected. So where do government is drawing that line, sir?
Let me answer that. The policy is very clear. It's a public policy. In other words, the information which has been collected by a department or by an office of the or by an entity of the government, by incurring public expenditure alone is to be put on the portal. No private information, no sensitive information, sensitive word is very critical here, is to be put on the portal. So the sensitivity has got various angles. One is the private information, where the RTI comes in. The second one is the defense related, the other is security related information. So the policy makes it very clear that this is not to be put on the side. Secondly, even if it is not sensitive, it is affecting the business of another organization. And that is, for example, there is some data which has been collected by an agency, by public expenditure, but that is to be price data. It is not a non-price, so we make it like a provision in the policy that you can charge the user for the use of the data. So that's also available. So as far as the policy is concerned, which is formulated by Department of Science and Technology, not by Department of IT, Department of Science and Technology has formulated a policy, it is very clear as far as the sensitivity of the data is concerned.
I would just add, you're making a very good point about, as an entrepreneur, if you want to create a company or service around a particular data set, you want to be protected from legal suits in the future, that it's legal for you to reuse this data. So in most countries, the data portals have information on the license, on the data license, a copyright, which means there's no copyright. It's an open license applied in most cases. So you can read the statement, somewhere on the website, which protects, all the users from, any illegal, issues. So in the case of India, I'm not sure if that's been done, so I cannot comment. But I know in many other countries, there is a specific, statement which protects the users of the data from legal liability. If no more questions, yeah, I think we are.
Good evening. Saki used the term infomediaries in her presentation. What does that mean in this context?
Sorry, thank you. Thanks for your question. Sorry, I forgot to explain it. Intermediaries, it's a terminology smashed by the information and the intermediaries. So intermediaries who use information or data into information, understandable information. So it can be journalists, civil society activists, entrepreneurs, and so forth, or individual citizens who can take the data and convert it into something very useful and understandable to general public or general citizens. That's the intermediary.
Since this is government data mostly that we're speaking about, and doesn't that require some authorization, big process? I mean, goes against the thought of open data per se.
It does. There's a whole process for any particular data set to be put on the portal. There is a series of approvals which are required for that. And also a format also is there. The uniqueness about this is the data description is very critical here. The data is described by the data provider. Otherwise, it's just an Excel sheet. No, it's not that. For example, if the inflation data is to be put on the web portal, how is the inflation defined here? Who are the sources of this data? What are the other sources of the data? And there is a disclaimer also. It's an excellent framework which has been prepared by this. Otherwise, anybody can just an Excel sheet which doesn't make any meaning to the user. And the beauty of this portal is the researcher in the university, the academia, puts up various suggestions on what kind of data could be collected and could be put on the portal. That's the most striking thing about this, which is not very visible, which is the system tries to address that requirement. So this demand-supply gap, in that is tried to bear, but we are not able to cope with that demand because of the sheer inertia of the system.
Are there any more comments, questions? And if not, we can wrap up the session. Thank you very much.
Presentation, I request you to stay there for that. Thank you very much for touching upon a very important topic of open data, government data, and open government data. So, and these three things are different. Thank you for throwing light on such issues related to open government data. Thank you very much. I request Oleg to please present a memento to Mr. B.N. Satpathy from Planning Commission. And also to your colleague Saki, I will request you to please present a memento to her. Thank you very much, Saki, for a wonderful presentation. And I request Mr. Satpathy to present a memento to Oleg, and actually to both of them. Like they have come from World Bank, representing World Bank, and for the wonderful sharing of knowledge, the knowledge they shared with us. So with this, we conclude this session and request for a group photo. Thank you. Thank you to the